Chapter 2, Walden on Wheels. Cheechako, May 2005, Coldfoot, Alaska. Debt, $27,500 and growing. After I quit the Home Depot, I made a list of every Alaskan lodge, campground, and tourist operation that I could find on the internet and called each to find out if any of them were still hiring for the summer. But no one was. I was making these calls in May, and all the business owners I spoke with said that they'd done their summer hiring months earlier. One lady, though, who sounded like she was still looking for workers, asked me what my trade was. It was a question that hit me like a hockey puck to the back of the knee, the one body part my equipment didn't cover, because it reminded me of the one thing I neglected to prepare for throughout my college education, which was learning an actual skill. Her polite rejection to my honest answer, "I'm afraid I don't have a skill," I hoped, wasn't an augury of things to come. Unmarketable or not, I was determined to get up to Alaska that summer because I figured it might be the last summer in my life to do something adventurous. I'd be graduating from college next year, and to pay my debt, I knew I'd have to soon stagger around in the office hallways for conference rooms as one of the lobotomized undead, a young professional. Near the bottom of my list of Alaskan work sites was a camp in town called Coldfoot, population 35, whose website proudly advertised its status as the farthest north truck stop. It was in the middle of the Brooks Range, 60 miles north of the Arctic Circle, and 250 miles from the nearest stoplight in Fairbanks. Along the servicing the truckers who haul equipment up the Dalton Highway and the Prudhoe Bay oil fields, the truck stop also runs a small tourism operation. During the summer months, the Slate Creek Inn, a one-story, 52-room motel, was often full of tourists who traveled on Holland America and Princess Cruise bus lines up from Anchorage. Even though their trips were several weeks long, and even though they'd spent nights in innumerable hotels and lodges along the way, Coldfoot still left such an impression on them that several tourists felt inspired to leave pithy comments on hotel reviews websites. "This motel was nasty," one guest said. One step better than a tent." "Truly dreadful," bemoaned a third. Because Coldfoot's remote location made it difficult for the camp manager to attract seasonal employees, he was still seeking a pair of lodge cleaners. I interviewed, got the job, leaped into air jubilantly, and asked for my freshman year roommate, Josh, if he wanted to join me. Josh, though, balked at the last minute. So I persuaded my other good friend, Paul, to take leave of absence at his job at UPS Distribution Center, promising the adventure of a lifetime. I was going to Alaska. Because my car wasn't suited for a long cross-continent road trip, I asked my father if I could borrow his SUV. He agreed. I lent him my car, and to make sure I felt some semblance of freedom and self-reliance, as any self-respecting adventurer ought to feel, I promised that I'd pay his monthly car payments for the whole summer. It took us 7 days and 4,500 miles to get from New York to Coldfoot. The memory of our road trip is bordered with a dreamy blur, perhaps because we traveled in an almost chronic state of sleeplessness. It was more or less a 24-hour-a-day operation. While one slept, the other drove. We lived on peanuts, beef jerky, and Dr. Bod, a cheaper supermarket brand of Dr. Pepper. We sang Tom Cochran's "Life is a Highway" in Alberta Prairie, came to a halt in front of the herd of bison in the Yukon, and, upon running out of conversation topics, had long conversation about which animal we most want to be and later do. If, just for the summer, we thought of ourselves not as poor students but daring adventurers, and when we crossed the Alaskan border and arrived in Coldfoot, all we wanted to do keep going and make our grand entrance into the wild. But first came a week of cleaning. For 8 hours a day, we made beds, scrubbed showers, and brushed toilets for $8 an hour. On the summer solstice, June 21st, which is more or less an observed holiday in the Arctic, we cleaners got together with the rest of the Coldfoot crew, the guides, maintenance workers, cooks, servers, dishwashers, and all got drunk on Miller High Life on the gravel bank of the Koyukuk River. As the midnight sun carouseled around us, I tottered around a bonfire and screamed at the top of my lungs, "I'm in Alaska!" Paul and I were eager to test our manhood in the wild, so we decided to climb the biggest mountain within a reasonable distance of the truck stop. Scanning a giant topographic map of the region at a nearby ranger station, we confidently placed our fingers on Blue Cloud, a 5,910-foot peak just inside the gates of Arctic National Park and Preserve, which would be an off-trail backcountry hike 10 miles each way. Aside from the stroll, we took up a small hill when we drove through Yellowstone National Park. This would quite literally be the first hike of our lives. Paul and I had grown up in western New York, a topographically challenged plain of flatland, on top of which sat a horrid landscape of subdivisions, chemical plants, and abandoned warehouses. Our suburban neighborhood was called Country Meadows, which was mostly rural when we were kids, but had been, as we grew up, bulldozed and paved over to make way for new houses and tracks. What adventures could we embark on had to take place in virtual video game worlds or on television screens, or at best within the borders of football fields and hockey rinks. So no opportunity ever called for us to filter water, light a fire, use a compass, or do anything even remotely manly. Paul was a closet metrosexual who wore pink polos because he got them on sale, and insisted to anyone who inquired that his arms were, in fact, naturally hairless. I was woefully inept at just about everything indoors and out. When Paul and I tried to set up our tent on a pre-trip trial run, the finished product looked like a crumbled tissue. We were Cheechakos, a term Alaskan natives used during the gold rush, which meant more or less the idiots from down south who don't know what they're doing. More precisely, we were suburbanites, only familiar with landscapes of strip malls and sublots, soccer fields, and sprawl. I hoisted onto my shoulders my brand new backpack filled with a large camcorder, an aging 3-person tent that a friend had lent us, and a cumbersome bear-resistant food container holding a few peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and a sleeping bag that I sloppily strapped to the pack's exterior. The ranger station didn't have an extra topographic map, so gave us a faded photocopy of the area on a regular-sized sheet of paper. Paul and I, already struggling with the heft of our packs, walked along an old caterpillar mining trail that petered out after a mile, and then ducked and elbowed our way through a dense thicket of alder trees. Upon reaching a clearing, we looked at each other excitedly. Sizing up the landscape that spread out before us, we could see there weren't any streets or buildings. We couldn't hear any hum of traffic or planes screeching through the sky. We finally escaped the babble of man and his machine. We finally entered the wild. We stood in the middle of the wide, rolling green valley. The country was grassy and open except for a procession of gnarled spruce and wizened birch that followed a creek. Perhaps tired of the Arctic's fleeting summers and bitterly cold winters, the trees seemed to have embarked on a forlorn exodus out of the valley in search of balmier pastures. Farther back there were mountains, glorious mountains, with seams of shining snow branching down from flint-gray peaks. It was as if we walked into a black-framed motivational poster with something like "Perseverance" printed at the bottom. The Brooks Range, a 700-mile east-to-west mountain chain spanning across northern Alaska and Canada, is almost completely uninhabited, except for grizzly black bears, caribou, moose, lynx, wolves, and wolverines that call the mountains home. Swarms of summer mosquitoes, negative 60-degree Fahrenheit winters, and government ownership of the land have slowed the spread of human settlement and enabled the mountains to maintain a primal "I'll kill you if you get lost in me" character. And while the brooks don't reach the towering heights of the Alaska Range to the south, their desolate nature makes them the sort of mountains that ought to be introduced with the sounding of a Chinese gong and honored with revered silence. Paul and I, silent, felt unsettled and invigorated. It was as if we had landed on another planet. About an hour into our walk, we saw trail-inch-deep bear tracks next to the creek where we were walking. Paul and I looked into each other's wide white eyes. We didn't speak out loud, but it was clear they were thinking the same thing. We need to get the fuck out of here right now. It was almost hard for me to believe the grizzly bear still existed. It was an animal that would seem more at home in the